class. Hi class. I hope you find my review interesting. I did it on reader response criticism, and based off of the book, it says a literary theory that focuses on the reader or audience and their experience of a literary work, in contrast to others' theories that focus attention primarily on the author or the content and form of the work. In a sense, readers effectively perform the text into existence, sort of like how a musician makes music from a score. So your imagination, like say you're reading a story and you're able to apply it to yourself, or you're mentally creating images from the words, in a sense that is a reader response. So, among critics who challenge new critical assumptions, reader response critics regard the work not as what is printed on the page, but as what is experienced temporarily through each act of reading. So the primary focus falls on the reader and the process of reading rather than on the author or the text. Some theoretical assumptions are literature is performative art and each reading is a performance, analogous to playing, seeing a musical work, enacting drama. Literature exists only when it's read, meaning is an event versus the new critical concept of the affective fallacy. Literature text poses no fixed and final meaning or value. There is no one correct meaning. Literary meaning and value and transactional dialogue created by the interaction of the reader and the text. So it's very personal. When some is personal, some can be objective, but for a sense, the majority of reader response you can apply to yourself. According to Louis Rosenwald, a poem is what the reader lives through under the guidance of the text. And some varying emphasis is how readers interpret text. Sometimes, like I said, they do call it subjective. The psychoanalytical critic of Norman Holland is that readers group literature together through styles and identity themes. For example, like say you enjoy going on adventures, or you aren't able to go on adventures and you read adventure books to experience that journey that either you can apply to your own life or that you want to experience because you're not able to in real life. And so through the words of the literature, you're able to create this story mentally in your head and experience it. Let's see, there are some different types of readers based off of George Dillon's classification. I found 3 that he listed: character, action, moral, style. That literature is coextensive with experience, sort of like how I described the adventure stories and how you can apply it to your own experiences. Say they like go on an adventure to Alaska and you've been there and you've gone fishing and you've lived in the woods, and you're able to sort of compare what you experienced with the book. And then the second choice is diggers for secrets. Those find hidden meaning in literature, psychoanalysis, motives, and characters. That, for example, can fall into the genre of either suspense or mystery, and where the author leaves gaps in their information that is given to the reader, allowing you to either come to your own conclusion or giving you a sense of uncertainty for suspense. So those are some examples. The third is anthropologists, and those look for cultural patterns, norms, and values. For instance, like new historicists, they tend to apply like culture and social status to the literature that they're able to access. There are many more personal interpretations readers experience when reading literature. And how text governs readers is it focuses on how text guides, constrain, control reading, often use linguistic, stylistic, and narratological methods of analysis. For example, Wolfgang Iser argues that the text in part controls the reader's response, but contains gaps that the reader creatively fills. There is tension between some critics who compare either the implied reader and the actual reader. The implied reader who is a reader who established by the response inviting structures of the text. This type of reader is assumed and created by the work itself. So the character inside the book is described in detail. It's not something that you create, but it's something that you can visualize easier because of all the detail that is given to you through the words. And then the actual reader is one who brings his or her own experience and preoccupations to the text. This actual reader tends to be more realistic reader, and in a sense, when characters are presented and given, even if they're given a very distinct description, they sort of make them into their own character. They can a lot of times, if it's the main character, the reader tends to put themselves in that position. And let's see, there are some, the reader tends to observe expectations brought up through the text. So like when it's, for example, it's when you create your own conclusion to the text. And there's different genres and particular works that construct different classes or kinds of readers. Sort of like, I'll get into that later when I talk about the types of reader response. Literature helps shape social identity, and social status shapes the access to different kinds of literature. For example, I'll take myself. I grew up in a loving family and I had access to all kinds of books, and yet I still focused and leaned towards more so adventure books that were available to me through my family who presented them to me, and I tend to fall along the same line as an interest of my grandfather and his books, because he was the one that mostly gave me my books. And so the readers don't ask what the literature means, but what the work does through the readers. And gaps in the text allow for different interpretations. Some are never filled, resulting in uncertainty. And then some gaps are temporary, like withholding a murderer's identity until the mystery is solved. Let's see, some history behind reader response I found is, although literary theory has long paid some attention to the reader's role in creating the meaning and experience of literary works, modern reader response criticism began in the 1960s and 70s, particularly in America and Germany. So, for example, works done by Norman Holland, Stanley Fish, Wolfgang Iser, Hans Robert Jauss, Roland Barthes, and many others. Some important predecessors were L.A. Richards, who in 1929 analyzed a group of Cambridge undergraduates' misreadings. And then there's Louis Rosenwald, who in Literature as Exploration in 1938 argued that it is important for the teacher to avoid imposing any preconceived notions about the proper way to react to any work. And C.S. Lewis in an experiment in criticism in 1961. Reader response theory recognizes the reader as an active agent who imparts real existence to the work and completes its meaning through interpretation. And the reader response criticism argues that literature should be viewed as a performing art in which each reader creates their own, possibly unique text-related performance, so making it more personal. And then there are 3 types of reader response that I ran across, and let's see, those were a reader that is an individual reader experience, which they consider to be individualist. An example of that is Michael Steig and Walter Slaughter, shown that students' highly personal responses can provide the basis for critical analysis in the classroom. The next one would be a reader that conducts psychological experiments and defined self-readings, which is called the experimenters. An example of that is Reuven Zur in Israel has developed in great detail models for the expressivity of poetic rhythms of metaphor and of word, sound, and poetry, including different actors reading of a single line of Shakespeare. And the last one that I ran across was a reader who assumes a fairly uniform response by all readers, which they consider to be uniformist. This is ones that most people tend to do, like in a classroom with readings that they're not interested in or can't apply to themselves. And an example of that is Wolfgang Iser exemplifies the German tendency to theorize the reader and so posit a uniform response. And so that brings me to my examples, and one of that is my first reading of The Tree Keepers, and still even today I took the individualist viewpoint of reader response criticism. I had never liked reading until I was given this book and read it for the first time in 4th or 5th grade. The Tree Keeper was written by Susan McGee Britton. The story is of an orphan girl named Bird, and her journey with her friends, a cat, and a chimera, to plant a tiny seed she believes will change everything. And might look like I'll try to read the whole synopsis that I have of it. The Bird is an orphan girl. She's small and pale and has dark eyes. The dark eyes really stood out to me in this story, and that's one thing that I remember them describing because they were supposed to be so deep. And then the chimera with its head of a lion and tail of a snake. This was one of my first crossings with a sci-fi-esque creature, and I found it fascinating, and it was one of the many things that drew me to the story. And the story also circles around a little locket that holds a seed that is the last chance to bring health and life to all of this land. So Bird's world has been ravaged by Lord Rendaren, a warlord from the north, who now rules the world with cruelty. Bird lives in the ruins of the small market village of Greenock, where only old folk, wildlings, beggars, and outcasts remain. Her greatest treasure is half of a baby blanket embroidered with birds and stars and gold. Her greatest yearning is to find her father, whom she knows is in her heart is still alive. Bird's friend, Farwinder, sells sweaters of his own knitting in the market and often gives her food. As conditions worsen, Farwinder takes Bird to live with his friends, the sad and lovely Saladin, who has a cottage deep in the hills near Greenock. Here, Bird joins 3 other orphans in Saladin's care. She learns of Saladin's unhappy history with the warlord Rendaren and the sad story of the fall of the tree that speaks. Along with the death of the chimeras and the prophecy about a beautiful child wrapped in sparrow wings and a star-shaped leaves who will someday plant the seed for a new tree. When the tree grows again, the thallus made from its sap will bring healing to the sick and courage to the fearful, and maybe give folk the strength to throw off the yoke of Rendaren. In time, Saladin recognizes Bird's precious star blanket as the prophesied wrapping of sparrow wings and star-shaped leaves. Bird is revealed as the child of prophecy, helped by her three orphan friends, the chimera Ally and the white kitten Finder. Bird undertakes a journey to plant the seed, but not before Saladin and Farwinder are captured and carried off by Rendurin's forces. Eventually, they make it through their journey. Bird becomes someone who watches over the tree, while her companions all go their separate ways. While reading, I had already formulated a conclusion based off of how I wanted the story to end, but I did not get this ending that I wanted. And since the book was a novel, there was no sequel to the story. The rest of their lives, their adventure, was left to the imagination of the reader. I always felt satisfied reading it, but always left with the feeling of wanting more, wanting the rest of the story of Bird and the three orphan friends. So I still, even though it's considered a children's book, I still read this book today, and I enjoy it even more each time I read it. I don't know if I can apply it to myself in a sense, but just going on an adventure with friends, being able to fight for something and look for things that you're wanting to find, is something that I guess I can apply to my personal experiences. I've had several journeys that I've gone on that have had several obstacles in them, but eventually I'm able to prevail over them. And since this story, I've always been fascinated in adventure and mythological stories. The other example I have is of Beowulf. I first read Beowulf in high school, and I took a uniformist view on the reading. One reason being I used to never want to read things that were assigned to me in class. But on my second and third reading of the old story, I began to see it through an individualist viewpoint. Ever since I read The Tree Keeper, I have been fascinated with adventure stories, legends, myths, and anything that had weird creatures like the chimera in The Tree Keeper. So I first noticed my interest in mentally creating an image of Grendel, the creature that Beowulf fights. Then the battles of Beowulf between Grendel's mother, and eventually in his later battles between him and the dragon. The story of the dragon, his tragic killings, and eventually his death pulled on my interest in mythological creatures and adventure stories. I now read the story of Beowulf very often, not only enjoying how it's written, but also the journey taken by Beowulf's life. And it's very fantastical and gives you an old world feeling to it. And I've always enjoyed that. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. And if you want any more information about either of the books, please leave a question and I will give you my personal reader's response to the readings. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in class.